So yeah, as you say, record transfer spend in January. So we're looking at over 550 million at the moment, and that again can move. So that's obviously surpassing the previous record of 430 million in January 2018. And then, as you say, yeah, from a seasonal spend in 22-23, Premier League clubs are now up to over 2.5 billion, which kind of highlights just the level of capability of spend that they've got in the market at the moment. So I think when you look at January transfer window alone, the Premier League clubs have spent 3 times more than the other big 5 leagues combined. And then when you look at seasonal spend, again, when you combine those other big 5 leagues together, again, the Premier League is spending more than all of those combined, which, yeah, is just incredible. And I think when you look at the key thing to look at is obviously when we talk about transfer spend, we talk about gross spend, so the total amount spent on player transfers, and then the net spend, so the difference between the total amount spent and then what they've received on player transfers as well. I think even when you look at it at that level, that's where it's most stark, where you have the spend of the Premier League on a net basis at 1.5 billion over the course of the season. And then when you look at the other big 5 leagues as a collective, they're actually in a net receipts position. So they're actually receiving more from the sale of players than what they're spending on players, which is quite stark to what obviously you see in the Premier League. There's obviously, I think, as we've highlighted in the Football Money League, that the superiority of the Premier League in terms of the revenue that it's able to generate is then driving a lot of that spend. So I think we've obviously seen that revenue in the past is a good indicator of what resources clubs have to then spend on transfers. And yeah, when we look at the Money League, 11 of the top 20 are from the Premier League, and then 16 in the top 30. So that really highlights that financial superiority. And yeah, there are obviously other things that come into that as well when you look at new ownership at certain clubs, and then also on-pitch performance is a big factor. So whether that's pushing for European competition or obviously league titles, and then at the other end of the spectrum on actually just maintaining a place in the Premier League is obviously a key driver of what's going on across the market. But yeah, there's still obviously a bit of time left in the window, and yeah, we'd expect that number to keep creeping up. Playing the Premier League was the only league of the other big 5 that actually increased its media rights in the latest cycle. All the others either declined or stayed flat. So I think that, again, it highlights that ability of the Premier League to continue to maximise that international interest and particularly in maximising those international broadcast rights. And as we've seen over the years, that broadcast revenue is a key driver of revenue generation in football and sport more broadly. But yeah, that ability to maximise that is critical, and is obviously driving activity in the transfer market as well. The intention is obviously to try and equalise it a bit. I think the challenge with that is obviously the gap now between the Premier League and the rest. There's, yeah, obviously the Champions League comes into that. There obviously is scope for additional Premier League clubs to make it into the Champions League as well. But I think that gap is going to take more than restructuring the Champions League to be able to close that. And I think it really requires innovation of those other leagues to maximise their international reach. So obviously in their international broadcast rights with those international sponsors, and also the way that they engage with fans is going to be critical for them to look at closing that gap. But certainly in the short term, that's going to be difficult. The revenue is a key driver of that, and I think revenue is going to look to continue to increase. I think one of the good indicators is to look at the transfer spend as a percentage of revenue. And I think, as I say, on the net transfer spend, we're looking at about a quarter of revenue is being spent on transfers. So I think that is, it's a lot. It's higher than it's ever been, but I think it's definitely managed appropriately with appropriate long-term business planning and financial control. It will look, I can see that continuing into the future.